You're all very welcome to the Liam Swords Memorial Lecture, which this year looks at the World Congress of the Irish Race, which was held in Paris in 1922, and in particular the Irish art exhibition associated with it. As the Congress and the art exhibition have to be viewed in the political context of the time, this talk is divided between the Congress, the political context that framed it, and finally the art exhibition. In January 1922, as the Irish state was transitioning to independence, its government, as part of the programme to have the state's sovereignty recognised internationally, participated in the World Congress of the Irish Race in Paris. If this event was happening today, it would probably be called a gathering of Irish people from across the globe. In 1922, the term race hadn't yet been compromised or become a loaded term. The Congress itself, which ran for 1 week, was a political gathering attended by an Irish delegation that included 3 future Irish presidents and diaspora organisations from 20 countries. Around 100 delegates represented their country organisations, and there were invited guests also. In total, approximately 250 people attended. It was also occasioned by a month-long Irish art exhibition of almost 300 artworks by 100 different artists, which is now largely forgotten. It seems to have got lost in the events of the revolutionary period. So this is just some timelines. It was planned and happened against the background of these momentous times in Ireland. Looking at this timeline, we see that the idea originated really at the height of the War of Independence in February 1921. And then it was planned between the truce, which was in July 1921. So it was planned after the truce between that and the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty. And it took place after the treaty was approved by a now split Dáil and before the Civil War. So I'll refer back to these dates again later. So, yeah. By January 1922, there was uncertainty over the immediate future. The British administration had started moving out of Dublin Castle, but there was still a presence. Many British soldiers were still barracked around the country, and the border was an issue. Most importantly, the state had not yet been recognised by any other country, and Britain in particular, with other countries, thought that the state would fail, but weren't sure if it would survive. The Paris event was a World Congress, or gathering of Irish diaspora organisations, but such Irish race meetings weren't unusual, and there had been a number of local race conferences in individual countries. These were organised by envoys that the first revolutionary Dáil, which was established in January 1919 and was declared illegal by the British administration, but these envoys had been dispatched to worldwide locations, including Britain, South Africa, United States, and countries in Europe and South America. Sometimes they helped establish local diaspora groups. This is just a sample of some of the diaspora groups here, and all of these individual groups took part in the Congress in Paris. In each individual country, the envoys engaged with politicians and the public through the local Irish diaspora, and the idea was to generate international pressure in England to grant Irish independence in the war, and also we're trying to get members of the Irish diaspora to contribute financially to the state. So, the Irish diaspora in 1922, 43% of Irish-born women and men, nearly 1 in 2, were living abroad. Okay. Typically at the local diaspora events, there would have been an address to the group on the struggle for Irish independence, and these would be occasioned by entertainment such as theatre or Irish music. These foreign missions were coordinated by the Department of Foreign Affairs, whose August 1921 report on their activities ends by detailing the resolution passed by the Irish Republican Association of South Africa, which is the one in February 1921, calling for a World Congress of the Irish race. Acting on this suggestion, this World Congress was scheduled to open on the 21st of January 1922, which would commemorate the 3rd anniversary of the first sitting of the revolutionary Dáil. Just a little bit in propaganda. Propaganda during the War of Independence was an important weapon in the struggle to achieve Irish independence. Historian Fergal McGarry said, Propaganda was critical to the outcome of the War of Independence due to the importance which both sides in the conflict attached to public opinion in Ireland, Britain and throughout the international community. This was because Ireland would never defeat Britain militarily, and in parallel with the military struggle was putting pressure on Britain to disengage from Ireland by using propaganda to convince the British and international public and political opinion that the use of force against a popular national movement was wrong, and by asserting that the Irish Republic was an actual functioning entity, increasing the international pressure in England over Ireland, and in particular to resolve the War of Independence, was key. Planning to hold the World Congress in Paris was further effort to raise the issue of Irish self-determination in an international arena, making it an issue of international concern, not just a matter of internal English politics. The Irish propaganda newsletter, the Irish Bulletin, produced by the Department of Propaganda in Dublin, was translated into the local language in various countries, where it was widely distributed, typically to newspaper offices and politicians. And the newspaper offices, the local newspapers would pick up the stories from the Irish Bulletin. And sometimes then it was just distributed more generally by the envoys themselves and their contacts. The French version, printed in Paris, stated more polemically about the reason for holding the Race Congress, that the Irish Congress chose Paris as a meeting place because the capital of France is at the same time the capital of the civilised world and the centre of Celtic civilization. The Congress was designed to showcase Irish uniqueness and the case for independence. This was to be achieved by focusing on Irish culture and society. Its only political aim was to establish a world administration body to link the various diaspora organisations to Ireland and coordinate their activities. So there'd be a central head office for all diaspora organisations based in Dublin. But political events were rapidly overtaking the Congress, and as we saw earlier, by early January 1922, just 2 weeks before the event, the previously united Dáil was now irrevocably split over the treaty. In an effort to prevent the Congress descending into acrimony between pro and anti-treaty sides, the government declared that the official Irish delegates should represent the Irish people and not any one party. They resolved to send an equal number of official Irish delegates from both sides, one led by Owen MacNeill and the anti-treaty group by Eamon de Valera. George Gavin Duffy, who at this stage was Minister for Foreign Affairs, wrote to de Valera inviting him to nominate delegates to the Congress, which was, and I quote, mainly of a cultural and artistic character. And he added that he thought it would be wise to send a delegation representing Ireland that would avoid party politics and would represent fairly the two parties in An Dáil. So basically, the understanding was that party politics would be avoided. Unfortunately, this was not the case, and the founding of a new world organisation for the Irish diaspora became a politically charged and contested issue. The organisation that was formed was called Fine Gael, was established. De Valera was elected president because most of the delegates who were there were anti-treaty and supported him. So de Valera was the first president of the Fine Gael organisation. The Dáil later effectively refused to support the new organisation, and it had floundered even before the Civil War started. The Dáil also later established an inquiry to see if the event had been politicised, and this was almost an early tribunal. In Paris, neither side knew what benefit would accrue from controlling the new organisation. In hindsight, there was no advantage, because the main purpose for the diaspora, as the Irish state saw at that stage, was to get them as a medium to put pressure on England to find a solution to the Irish problem, as to say. However imperfect that solution was, it had now started with the Anglo-Irish Treaty. Politics and the dispute. There's two slides on this. This is the agenda. It goes over two slides, and I'll flip between the two of them. Politics and the dispute over control of the World Organisation dominated the contemporary reporting and subsequent historical commentary of the event. But as you can see from the agenda, which is recreated here, its main focus was artistic and cultural. The agenda is recreated primarily from Desmond Fitzgerald's papers in UCD. As you see, there was a motor tour of Paris, which I'll come back to later, just the second item on the agenda. And I'll come back to that in a moment. There were two principal Irish music concerts, and as we see on this slide, much of the discussion was taken up with language, literature, arts, and music, and so on, discussion on those. We'll see at the top there was theatre and the important art exhibition, which I'll deal with later as well. The art exhibition ran for 4 weeks rather than the 3 that was printed on the agenda. To date, the cultural elements get scant mention, and the art exhibition has been virtually ignored. One art historical reference to it that I did find described it as probably a modest affair. Art and culture were non-contentious issues, which both sides could agree on. They also agreed on the need for the World Organization, but disagreement arose over who would control it. The Tour of Paris, which top here, seen at the top of that was at the top of the agenda on the Sunday, is interesting for a number of reasons. The movements of this Irish group in Paris were monitored by the French authorities. The French Diplomatic Archives in Nantes holds a sizable file of correspondence on the World Race Congress between French embassies in Europe, primarily Dublin, the French Foreign Ministry, and the French Interior Ministry. The French authorities were concerned that there would be a strong anti-British demonstration emanating from the event, and I quote, on our territory. The prefecture of the police was instructed to keep a strong but discreet eye on the event. The French embassy in Ireland would inform Foreign Affairs in Paris of plans as they unfolded, and the Interior Ministry had the delegates followed. The French embassy in London briefed the British authorities, who informed the French that they were officially ignoring it. These papers also show that the French authorities only allowed the event to proceed and granted import licenses for the art exhibits after they received assurances as to its exclusively artistic and charitable ends. These diplomatic papers are the only source of accurate numbers of the attendees at the Congress to give the account of the number of attendees on each day. Okay, so back to the tour. So when they were following, they followed the tour as well. The authorities recorded, so these are the sites of Irish interest. The authorities recorded that 3 cars were hired for the tour and mounted with Irish flags. These are the locations visited. La Bastille, the scene of the most famous popular uprising to overthrow a tyrannical regime, which resonated with the theme of the race Congress. Notre Dame, a symbol of the Catholicism that both Ireland and France shared, and England didn't. The Pantheon, honouring the French people and nation. The Irish College, as it was then, this location where we are now. Here, De Valera made a speech to the students in which he stated that he hoped they would all come back good Republicans. This was cited later in the Dáil inquiry as De Valera politicising the event. And then there's a site that the French diplomatic report called the Chapel of the Former Convent of the Irish, 15 Rue des Carmes, the previous home for the Irish College in Paris. And we have St. Joseph's Church on Avenue Auch, effectively the parish church for the English-speaking community in Paris. I think it still has that function. It has strong connection with the Irish Passionate Order, Aid and Try. It doesn't look like this anymore. It's been knocked down and rebuilt, and it's a wonderful sort of almost subterranean church, a wonderful piece of architecture. And on their trip to Montmartre Cemetery to visit the grave of an Irish 1798 soldier who also fought for Napoleon. He was called Miles Byrne. He was from Wexford. And when I went looking for his grave, what I noticed were it was hung with the Wexford colours. That's how I found it. But I'd never heard of him before. But obviously it's in someone's memory. The following Saturday, De Valera also laid a wreath and made a speech at the tomb of the unknown soldier at the Arc de Triomphe. Something that was extensively and positively reported in the French press. The events of this week, including the art exhibition, were reported in Irish, French, and English papers, and also covered in the US and Australia. Press releases were clearly issued, and because very similar reports were carried in different newspapers. Example, by visiting Montmartre, which was postponed until the following Saturday, but because they ran out of time when they were doing it, and this is recorded quite clearly in the diplomatic archives. But the press reports on it records the visit as taking place as planned. Though no state had yet recognised Ireland, this tour was presented as an official tour by a European state, the cars, the flags and the locations. It made a visible statement of a legitimate state. The image of an important, independent, self-confident nation was further projected by the sites chosen to host the Congress. And visiting these sites, you really get a feel for their ambition. The main conference was held in the opulent Continental Hotel, at this time the largest and most luxurious in Paris. It occupies a whole block overlooking the Tuileries Gardens. This is now the Westin Hotel. In the photograph on the right standing, we see Shortall O'Kelly opening the first session of the Congress. Owen MacNeill is waiting to chair it. He's sitting in the seat. There's some more of these photographs outside in a little display I put up earlier, so you can look at those after we're finished. This is another view of the Congress, in which we see some of the delegates and some of the countries that they're representing. So we can see Italy, Bolivia, Chile, Tasmania. The musical evenings that I mentioned earlier were also held in the Hotel Continental. Yeah, that's just another view, another photograph of the hotel, just the side entrance. And these are the programs for the concerts. This is the contents of the second conference, and this shows sort of the details. Just note the quartet for Terence MacSweeney is the first piece, because I'll refer back to this later. We also see some other familiar pieces here. The bottom we see Follow Me Up to Carlo, FQ, and we see the West Awake in the middle of the second page. The event secretariat and many of the delegates stayed around the corner in the equally upmarket Grand Hotel. And this is the photograph that was used to advertise this talk on the right. And there's a close-up of that. So, okay, so a group of delegates. This one just shows De Valera, Countess Markovich on the right as you look at it, and Mary MacSweeney, Terence MacSweeney's sister, on the left. The Irish plays that I mentioned and the Grand Ball were staged in the Salon Och, which is still a magnificent townhouse that hosts high-end expensive events today. And the two plays that we saw earlier were performed here. The opening reception was in the Palais d'Orsay Hotel, now part of the museum. This unflattering image was used in the Illustrated London News. And I'll come back to this photograph later because it illustrates a point later on as well. Okay. This was the image used in Le Monde Illustrated, and it shows a much more professional group of delegates and politicians. That's just another version of that photograph. The art exhibition was held in Galerie Barbizange, which is on 109 Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. This is a large and important art gallery in Paris that exhibited contemporary art between 1911 and 1928. The gallery showed the work of avant-garde artists like Gauguin and Matisse, and famously exhibited Picasso's The Demoiselle d'Avignon for the first time. The catalogues for all its exhibitions, including the Irish exhibition, are available in the Musée d'Art Décoratif. That was the same street that Eileen Gray in the same year opened her shop. Eileen Gray was a famous Irish designer, artist, architect. Actually, 1922 was also the same year that the Shakespeare and Company published Joyce's Ulysses. an important year, Irish year in Paris, I suppose. But with these impressive, and they really were impressive venues, and when you go and you look at them, even today, you can't help but being impressed. Ireland was taking its place in Europe, projecting an image as an important, confident, functioning and independent state. Citing the Congress in Paris was also an early deployment of public and cultural diplomacy by the emerging state. They were seeking to persuade the international countries through culture, values and ideas to support their ideals for national sovereignty. As well as side political meetings, which would be beneficial in the future, official reports show the Irish delegation met with a number of academics interested and involved in promoting Irish culture, or to quote one other report on the event, entertain eminent Celtic and Allied studies scholars. And these were from universities in various countries. Yves-Marie Goblet, one of the French delegates, was an academic in the Sorbonne University who lectured and published on Irish studies. His papers in the BNF contain, Bibliothèque Nationale de France, contain numerous Irish studies publications, as well as the art catalogue for the Race Congress and a copy of the proceedings. There's a small sample of these papers here, including publications on Ireland and on Ireland's cause by the chief Congress organiser in Paris, Kathleen Hughes, look here, and reports on various Celtic congresses that took place between 1917 and 1921. Therefore, a number of the delegates, including Goblet, met at previous events such as these Celtic congresses and were building on past cultural engagements and academic exchanges on Irish studies, language and theatre at the Paris event. Goblet and the second French delegate, Robert Begnat, also known as O'Benquet, he Irishized his name, were both Breton separatists and were another reason that the French authorities monitored the activities of the Congress. At one time, O'Benquet established a branch of Sinn Féin in Brittany. As well as theatre performances and musical recitals, Irish life and culture was projected in a series of lectures central to the main proceedings. These were delivered by what the Freeman Journal newspaper at the time called eminent Irish authorities. Each speaker who travelled specifically to deliver a paper was paid £40 by the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs. The texts and some of the texts and some reports of these lectures are available, and a nationalist tone pervaded throughout. E.J. O'Riordan of the Irish Industrial Development Association discussed establishing a hydroelectric power plant. J.J. Walsh was the chief supporter of holding the Tailteann Games, and the Congress passed a resolution asking the Irish government to organise an Irish Olympiad to be held in Dublin this year, 1922, during which efforts would be made to revive old Irish games. The French diplomatic archives records Walsh inviting the French press to a briefing at which he informed them that the Tailteann Games, Irish Race Olympics, would take place in Dublin in August 1922. Okay. So some of the speakers are in this slide. We have Dr. Douglas Hyde, who spoke in the Irish language, and we see him on the extreme right as you look at the picture with the unmistakable moustache, who was become Ireland's first president. He reviewed the work of the Gaelic League. The French diplomatic report on his contribution, the only one that they did comment on, that says that he was humorous, well received by his audience, and that he spoke ironically about the English attitude. He was also conciliatory and urged the Irish to forget the evil that has been done to them. Jack Yates, who's on the top row on the extreme right as we look, delivered a paper on modern aspects of Irish art, the only lecture he ever delivered. In this paper, Yates extolled national sympathy. He says, when painting takes its rightful place, it will be in a free nation, and there is no country more ready than any other to lift painting into its rightful place, and that is Ireland, this land of ours. And if we have a bold ambition for our country, she will lead the world in every phase of truth. Arthur Darley, who's in the middle of the top row, just to the left of the middle, he was the chief organiser of the musical evenings, stated that Ireland never bowed to a conqueror, and after centuries of suffering and prosecution, still gloriously preserved her life and music, and she will once more be the land of song. William Butler Yeats, talking on literature, he's a lecture titled Lyrics and Plays of Modern Ireland. Talks of Irish history being transformed in 1916 by lyric poets. He spoke about the literary revival and name-checks Lady Gregory, Pádraig Colum and James Stephens. James Joyce also gets a mention. His lecture covers the founding of the Abbey Theatre and lists dramatist Lady Gregory, Lennox Robinson, and cites John Milton Synge as Ireland's greatest playwright, and I quote, all well known in London and the USA, using an international context to further validate their importance. Yeats defends or describes Irish authors writing in English as opposed to Irish as being perfumed with an Irish idiom, a poetic dialect only discernible in Irish writers. Synge's play, The Riders to the Sea, performed during the Congress, was an example of this Irish idiom, Hiberno-Irish, as directly translated from the Irish. Just incidentally, the French Interior Report records their surprise that all the proceedings were in English. The main cultural event was the art exhibition. It cost just under half the budget of the complete event. So it was just over 4,000 was the budget, and the art exhibition cost almost exactly 2,000, which is an indication of its importance to the state. The organisers invited the French Minister for Fine Art to open the event, and he delegated the task to Léonce Benedict, who was then the curator of the Musée de Luxembourg. The Luxembourg at this stage was regarded as the most prestigious modern art gallery in the world, and Benedict was also a very important central figure in the Paris art world. There is correspondence about the Irish art exhibition between Benedict and the Ministry in the French National Archives in Saint-Denis. The intended audience for the exhibition was threefold. The Parisian public, which I suppose is an international audience, and the catalogue was produced in French, and notices of the event were carried in Parisian newspapers and art journals. The Irish who were already in Paris, and the Irish diaspora attending the conference, who were being asked to reconnect with their homeland in the viewing of Irish life and history through art. The idea for an art exhibition to occasion the event arose in correspondence between the organisers based in Paris and the Irish Minister at the time for Fine Art, there was one then, George Noble Count Plunkett. Plunkett's papers in the National Library in Ireland contains his correspondence in this art exhibition with the organisers, and also with De Valera and Arthur Griffith. De Valera was president of the Dáil time, and Arthur Griffith at that stage was Minister for Foreign Affairs. Plunkett had the full cultural programme under the remit of his ministry. He was particularly engaged with the art exhibition, suggesting works to be shown. I used his quote at the start of this talk, or the title of this talk. I know its value for propaganda, and I should like the Irish worker to gain some profit by it. Plunkett also discussed the matter with De Valera, as I said, when he was president, and with Griffiths when he was Minister for Foreign Affairs, and both approved. By the end of November 1921, they were deciding on what to exhibit. Of course, things were changing fast on the political landscape, and the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed on the 6th of December 1921, dividing, as I said earlier, the previously united Sinn Féin Republic and Dáil. Plunkett then wrote to the organisers stating that this proposed art exhibition in Paris is out of the question under present circumstances. Plunkett, De Valera and others resigned their positions on the 9th of in the Dáil on the 9th of January 1922, 2 days after the Dáil ratified the agreement, and less than 2 weeks before this was to start. However, despite the fervent disagreement between the pro and anti-treaty sides that would ultimately lead to the Civil War, it was decided that the event should go ahead. 94 mostly contemporary artists and craftspeople and societies from all over Ireland showed 281 works in 20 categories. Some single entries had multiple parts, such as 20 black and white drawings for book illustrations by Harry Clarke and 12 stained glass designs by Antúr Glenna. So there was 281 exhibits, but some of them were multiple parts, so it was sort of well over 300 in total. There were 100 paintings and sculpture, and the remainder in the arts and crafts categories. Art and craft categories include enamel, metalwork, embroidery, prints, stained glass, bookbinding and that. This is a bold, confident statement by a new country on the range, scale and quality of contemporary and visual art and artistic industries. This exhibition was also the first time the state, as the independent state was emerging, used art to position itself internationally. Sited in Paris, one of the major cities, but also the art capital of the world, and in front of a multinational audience, the new state was making a political statement. This is who we are, and this is how we see ourselves. Just as he aimed for a politically separate and independent state, it was also important that Ireland's identity was unique and culturally separate and independent. In a way, culture was paralleling the political. Irish art had to be distinguished as independent, national, and not English. This was problematic for the visual arts, as many leading Irish artists had trained in, were based in, and were exhibiting in England. People in England, Ireland and England looked alike. In these circumstances, how is the propaganda that Plunkett and the Dole sought for the art exhibition to become a manifesto for Irishness? This had already started in the culture lectures and continued in the art exhibition catalogue, which contained an essay by the most prominent French art critic of the time, Arsène Alexandre. His essay, entitled École Irlandaise, described the exhibition as the first outing of this Irish school of art, which is different to its English or Scottish equivalents, and I quote, proof of a separate independent race. Like Jack Yates in his lecture, Alexandre saw the West of Ireland landscape as unique and the primary source material for artists. This also exemplified the veneration that was in much of Irish nationalist culture of the Western Seaboard as the location of true Gaelic values. The West of Ireland was invested with a cultural capital as the new state was emerging, which was bestowed on it by Irish writers, artists and politicians. The Paris exhibition happened at the beginning of the West of Ireland being planted into the Irish psyche, home and abroad, as the essential source of national identity. The assumption or assertion, as in Synge's plays, Yeats and Henry's paintings and prints, was that something essential, authentically Irish and uncompromisingly Gaelic survived and still endured in that culture, more so than in the English-influenced East. The Irish landscape was well represented in the show in general. Example here by Paul Henry was presented as uniquely Irish and Gaelic. Benedict, who had opened the show on behalf of his minister, wrote to the same minister the next day, approving of the exhibition and proposing the purchase of a painting by Paul Henry from the exhibition for the Musée de Luxembourg collection. The full correspondence on this purchase is also held in the Archives Nationales in Saint-Denis. Henry had trained in Paris with Whistler, whose influence is often discernible in his work and is regarded as Ireland's first important post-impressionist painter. There is no indication of the political troubles that had beset the country in this painting, but a huge dominant sky threatens, as do the eerily dark hills in the background. The critic Le Figaro found something troubling and threatening in Henry's image, and I quote, Paul Henry's low cottages gathering like fearful beasts under the immense sky. A painting of a uniquely Irish scene entering an important French collection, authenticated Irish art, and its recognition helping to achieve the propaganda value sought by the organisers. Other paintings exhibited strove to be uniquely Irish. There are two versions of the art exhibition catalogue. The earlier catalogue, in the BNF, which is in the BNF, showed that apart from correcting errors, the updated catalogue also adds 77 exhibits, including the portraits of Irish political figures like Owen MacNeill by Cy Trench and Daniel O'Connell by Joseph Haverty. Countess Markievicz, with 6 works, was the main beneficiary, including this piece here. All the slides that I do from here on, bar one, and all the slides that have gone before, are from 1922, and the artworks are those that were exhibited as well, and there's many more of them available. Markievicz, in a widely reported contribution in a debate at the Congress, referred to the hideous caricature of Irish people by Cruikshank and other artists, which continued to present Irish people with simian, ape-like features as uneducated, dirty, drunk and fighting, incapable of self-government and reliant on British rule. She said English propaganda had made Irish people the laughingstock of the world, and she urged counteracting this negative image. And this is a theme that ran through the conference, people complaining about negative English propaganda in the Irish. Okay. This is a slide that I won't dwell on it too long. So if you look back to the newspaper photograph used by the London Illustrated News, the image chosen was the least flattering states-like image, and the only such image of over 20 and most of them are out there in the cabinets sourced. I'm not going to dwell on saying this, but if you look at the last cartoon, it's really the crux of British opinion or propaganda. And it's, should the Irish be allowed to govern themselves, or should the English save Ireland from her own people. So here we have Hibernia, and we can see it on her dress, being protected from the horrific Irishman by benevolent England. And these were quite common, and I'll refer to them. So the paintings are by Erskine Nicholl, but I could have picked a whole range of artists. It's just, he's usually cited, so I decided to go with that. John Lavery was prominent in the show, with portraits including Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith. These were painted at a time when the Dáil was still declared illegal by the British. These politicians are presented here as legitimate statesmen of a functioning government. Just as the role of Dáil Éireann was largely symbolic at this stage, before the stage, when these paintings were painted, its principal purpose was to assert the existence of a democratically elected Irish Republic. Exhibiting portraits of Irish politicians in statesman-like poses also asserted Ireland was a nation capable of self-government. If we look to the next major state-funded international exhibition of Irish art held in Chicago in 1933, portraits were exhibited, but none were of politicians. By this stage, Ireland was established with a functioning government and was in an evolutionary rather than a revolutionary phase. Political portraits weren't needed. As I said, all the work in these slides was exhibited in Paris in 1922, including this one of Cardinal Logue, who previously had been chair of theology here in the Irish College. I love that portrait. That's the main reason I put it up. Lavery made the biggest impact. He made the biggest impact with his painting of the funeral of Cork Lord Mayor Terence MacSweeney. MacSweeney had died in an English prison on hunger strike in October 1920. His death received international media attention and brought the Irish political struggle to a worldwide audience. Both Irish music concerts held during the Congress featured a string quartet dedicated to the memory of Terence MacSweeney as their central piece, as we saw in the earlier slide. When Lavery previously exhibited this painting at Glasgow in 1921, it was simply titled Southwark Cathedral, London, 1920, and the significance of the scene was lost. In Paris, it was titled Funeral of Terence MacSweeney, Lord Mayor of Cork, and MacSweeney's sister's attendance at the conference made it more poignant. Lavery exaggerates the height of the church and the sunlight picking out the Irish flag and the coffin as devices to add meaning to the painting. One of the most prominent overt national propaganda symbols that asserts national identity is the flag. And today, the Irish flag features in every official occasion, and it flew probably most prominently in history over the GPO in 1916. In this other Lavery painting here, featuring the Irish flag, Blessing the Colours, 1921, he depicts the first blessing of the Irish tricolour. The Archbishop of Dublin blesses the flag in St Mary's Pro-Cathedral. The new state has been baptised. Kneeling before the flag is a soldier in the Irish Free State Army uniform. The solemnity and importance of the occasion is heightened by the artist's use of muted tones and limited palette. The moment of consecrating the flag, symbolising the birth of a nation and the alliance of church and state at this critical juncture in Ireland's history. In the opening paragraph of the 1916 proclamation, Ireland calls her children to her flag. This Jack Yeats small history painting is called Bachelor's Walk in Memory. It projects an image of Ireland as an innocent sufferer of English atrocities, recalling an event witnessed by the artist of a flower seller leaving flowers at the spot where English soldiers shot four unarmed Dubliners dead and wounded over 30 in 1914. Academic and historian Wright Foster refers to the central figure who wears a shawl as a kind of Kathleen na Houlihan. The boy gives a sense of looking to the future and renewal after death. That life goes on is conveyed by the figure on the cart in the distance going about his business. It is understandable why Yeats decided to first exhibit this work. Now, he completed it in 1915, but the first time he showed it was in Paris in 1922, so 7 years later. Because at this time, the destiny of Ireland, however imperfect, was beginning to unfold from his recent troubles. And that message was conveyed in this urban scene. There was of sacrificial death in 1916, hope and renewal, and the ordinariness of life goes on. Patrick Toohey's subtle exhibit, Young Mayo Peasant, crossed from the overtly political Its subject, a poor but confident youth with his and his country's future entwined before them. One of a large number of works that were in this show from the exhibition that are now in national collections, which is a testimony in another way to the artistic quality of the show and the exhibits. There were other portraits of Irish political figures and images of the Irish struggle. But Irish literature and writers were also celebrated with sculptures of W.B. Yeats, Lord Dunsany and James Stephens, reinforcing what De Valera claims for Ireland's unique literary tradition, and I quote, the genius in the race, he said this at the Congress, and also, and the magnificent culture, the grand things the nation could give to the world. Dermot O'Brien, who was president of the Royal Hibernian Academy, the RHA, exhibited a portrait of playwright Lennox Robinson, but the title was Lennox Robinson, Author of Patriots and the Lost Leader. Adding the names of two nationalist plays Robinson wrote about Ireland's struggle for independence to the title, imbues the author and the paintings with nationalist credentials. All of these paintings were an important riposte to what Countess Markievicz and a number of other conference speakers termed English propaganda. The arts and crafts section presented itself as a continuum from the golden ages of Irish medieval art. In a way, it was on surer footing. In the correspondence mentioned earlier, when items were being considered for the exhibition, it was proposed to show some artefacts from the National Museum. This didn't materialise, but it shows that the intention was to exhibit these contemporary items as a visual continuum from the golden ages. The arts and crafts movement in Ireland distinguished itself from its English counterpart by being closely associated with the revived use of Celtic ornament. Irish stained glass had gained an international reputation at this time through exhibitors Harry Clarke, Antúr Glynna, Wilhelmina Geddes and others. This piece here is by Michael Healy. All glass works, bar this one by Harry Clarke, were religious and reinforced what historian Terence Brown and others state, that at this time Catholicism developed as a mark of national distinctiveness. The motor tour to Paris also emphasised this, visiting many Catholic religious sites. Prints published by the Coola Press depicted imagined views of a distinctive Irish life, such as the mountain farm or horse races on the Strand, and distinctive Irish types, and island people wearing wide-brimmed hats and shawls. They depicted how Irish people had begun to see themselves set in their own place, proud, industrious and independent. And although made more than 10 years earlier, they fitted the tone and objective of the exhibition. In the exhibition, painting and sculpture had evoked Irish heroes of political and cultural nationalism. The Coola Prints, as another review in Le Figaro noted, honoured the everyman. The Coola Press was just one of the pre-independence Celtic literary, artistic, revivalist cultural movements that provided a representation of Irish people who the British government or coloniser had politically failed to represent. Poets, artists, writers were presenting people with a view themselves. The prints in particular because they were part of popular culture since the early 1900s, and because they were cheaper and more widely disseminated than paintings, had more of an impact, particularly those that could state a claim as art. It's another cool print, and you see it's the tricolour, the flag again. One by Stella Solomon. It didn't reproduce great. It's from the Hugh Lane gallery. A Sarah Purser painting, now in the National Gallery of Ireland. I just put this up because she showed work in both the art and the art and crafts section. This was completed when Purser was based in Paris, so he created a direct connection with France. It's still called the Petit Déjeuner. Really good work, and shows the overall artistic quality again. Okay, the legacy. The exhibition strove to promote a historic Ireland, highlight British oppression, and show an Ireland capable of self-government, culturally unique and independent. In propaganda terms, this is about persuading people to the Irish point of view, and propaganda is always more effective when there's a receptive audience, as there was in Paris. The majority of artists involved had caught the spirit of the time and abandoned their academic designations. By that I mean none of the artists used their royal prefixes, either Royal Hibernian Academy or Royal Academy. Using the title would have been at odds with the leitmotif of the Congress and the exhibition, and they aimed to create political and cultural distance from the United Kingdom and anything royal. And this is the only important, in fact, it's the only exhibition that can find around that time or even the decades afterwards where this had been the case. Okay, however, this artistic zeal soon waned, and it was really following disillusionment with the odious civil war that followed. Lavery, as we have seen, was actively involved in this exhibition, and he travelled from London to view it. He had hosted the Irish treaty negotiators in London, and he wrote to Churchill petitioning for Irish independence in 1921. He then went on to represent Ireland in the 1924 Olympics, held here in Paris, and art was a competitive Olympic sport until the London Olympics in 1948. However, he represented the UK in 1928 and the 1932 Games, and continued to use his Royal Academy designation. In his lecture to the Congress, Jack Yates described pictures as a method of communication with the viewer, less complicated than the written or spoken word. In the late 1920s, he said he no longer wanted his paintings to be seen as a vehicle for expressing something else, and his output of political paintings virtually stopped. I think we've identified one more. Dermot O'Brien again exhibited his portrait of Lennox Robinson at the British Empire exhibition in 1924, despite the Free State government at that stage declining involvement because, and I quote, "the name does not attract." This time the painting title omitted the nationalist plays, and he designated himself as President Royal Hibernian Academy. So, summary. The events of the Paris Race Congress and the associated art exhibition were soon overshadowed by the Irish Civil War, and are both now a footnote to the history of that period. However, it was one of the last occasions Irish politicians from both sides met together before the end of the Civil War, and the first time the independent state displayed art for political purposes, an issue that is still discussed and relevant today. In this case, cultural independence paralleled political. The clearly stated political purpose was propaganda through a visual art approved by the state. Propaganda designed to persuade the international community to support Irish ideals. They were saying that Ireland is... That was a painting that was also exhibited there. So they were saying that Ireland is a unique nation with a history invested in high art objects created in medieval times and continue today in our arts and crafts, in metalwork, stained glass, and as we have two examples of embroidery. They also wanted to show that the use of force by the British against the popular national movement was wrong, as we saw earlier in the Yates and Lavery works. This image by Sean Keating is of Irish revolutionaries willing to take on the might of an empire, a not very subtle revolutionary claim. This was the first showing of this painting, as some of the people are identifiable and would have been the subject to arrest had it been shown in Ireland or England. They wanted to present the Irish as an independent race. This was asserted by Arthur Alexander in the exhibition catalogue, as was the uniqueness of the Irish landscape, the Irish landscape paintings. As a renowned international critic, Alexander, as an external expert voice, was validating this. But it's important because it was purchased. An unmistakable Irish landscape by Paul Henry was bought by the French government. The freshness and quality of such work was a counterweight to the Cruikshank and his fellow cartoonists and artists, such as we saw Erskine Nicholl and indeed Samuel McCloy, who provided stereotypical romanticised images for largely British patrons. Yeats, Henry, and other artists' work really were acts of decolonisation of the Irish visual imagination. Much British patronised artwork of Irish subject matter by the likes of the aforementioned Nicholl, McCloy and others portrayed the simian or dirty drunken Irish. The political portraits indicated a functioning government and were a counterweight, a nation capable of self-government. Asserting that the Irish Republic was an actual functioning entity with images of everyday life as shown in the quilt prints and other artworks. This self-portrait of Keating and his wife in uniquely Irish dress, Irish landscape, the artist in his own place. Keating was as close as the Irish national movement would come to having an official artist. Here, as in much of his work, and the work of the show in general, the personal is the political. Both figures are dressed in what is clearly recognisable as West of Ireland Aran Island dress, underlining the identification of the extreme West with a rugged and uncompromised Irish authenticity, creating an iconic image of how the new nationalist Ireland saw itself, saying this is who we are and this is how we see ourselves, an artistically and culturally unique and independent nation. So that's the last of the paintings. These are some of the reference. These are some of the sources in Ireland. These are some of the sources here in Paris. So, and that's some tiles from the St. Patrick's over there, and we just see the connection between Ireland and France. So at this stage, the lecture's finished, and I just want to sincerely thank the Liam Swords Foundation, Maura and Fenton in particular, because that's who I had most contact with, Declan and Pat also, for everything. I'd also like to thank the CCI, Nora and Stefan and various people for their time, for their courtesy during the summer, and for the time in setting this up today. I'd also like to thank you all for coming, particularly those people who travelled from Ireland, and especially my family. I think it's the first time they ever listened to me. So that's it. So thank you very much.